Sir, we have a critical breach. The human female has entered the restricted Cubs learning sanctuary and there, attempting to replicate her cognitive patterns. Vexar burst through the command center doors, his translator barely keeping pace with his panic. Clicking, Commander Draxel's four widened in genuine horror as he processed the words, evacuate. Immediately, human neural activity near developing minds could cause permanent psychological damage. They won't leave. Sir, Vexar's mandibles trembled. The Cubs think it's a game. The commander was already moving, triggering every emergency protocol in the diplomatic station's database. Red alerts cascaded across holographic displays as containment teams mobilized throughout the facility. This wasn't a weapons breach or a hull failure. This was something far more dangerous to the Quillian species, their cubs with minds still forming and neural pathways barely established were the most telepathically sensitive beings in the known galaxy. Exposure to foreign cognitive patterns during their developmental phase could fracture their consciousness permanently. How many Cubs? Draxel demanded, his primary hands flying across control panels while his secondary hands pulled up station. Schematic 3, sir. Ages 4 to 6. Standard cycles by the ancestors. Draxel felt his circulation slow. 3. Cubs in direct contact with human thought patterns. The Quillian government would have his head for this, assuming the Cubs survived with their minds intact. What is the human doing? She's Vexar consulted his data pad. Confusion mixing with his panic. She's sitting in the corner with a book, sir. Something called a textbook, and she has a beverage and a colored marking implement. She's what? Draxel couldn't process the absurdity. A human had breached their most sensitive area, exposed their most vulnerable population to cognitive contamination, and she was reading. Where are the Cubs now? There, mimicking her commander. All three are sitting cross-legged. That's a human posture, holding data pads upside down. Sir, they're holding them upside down and staring at them like the human stares at her book. Draxel's world tilted. The Cubs were already imitating human behavior. The imprinting had begun. This was beyond a diplomatic incident. This was a species-level crisis. Get doctor then from neurosciences. Get the containment specialists. Get everyone who has any expertise in juvenile cognitive development, and get the Qualarian family's diplomatic liaison before the parents find out. Too late, sir. The mother is already on route. She felt the disturbance in her Cub's mental patterns. Of course she did. Qualarian parents maintained constant telepathic bonds with their offspring. She would have sensed the moment her Cub's thoughts began diverging from normal developmental patterns. Draxel ran toward the sanctuary wing, his security team forming around him. What was a human doing in the Cub sanctuary anyway? That section requires level 9 clearance. Preliminary investigation suggests she took a wrong turn looking for the diplomatic library. Sir, she's a graduate student here as part of the cultural exchange program. Her credentials show she's studying something called organic chemistry. Student. Draxel's voice came out flat. An untrained, unaware human student wandered into our most restricted area, and now she's contaminating developing Quilarian minds with human cognitive patterns. They reached the sanctuary entrance through the transparent barrier. Draxel could see the scene that would haunt his career forever. Human, small by galactic standards, dark. Hair pulled back, wearing casual. Clothing covered in strange symbols, sat. In the corner beneath a climate control vent, she had a massive bound paper book. Open in her lap, a steaming cup beside her, and a yellow marking implement. Her hand. Her face showed intense concentration as she read, occasionally dragging the yellow marker across text and muttering to herself. And around her, arranged in a perfect semicircle, 3 Quilanian cubs sat in identical poses, their small bodies still developing their species characteristic iridescent sheen, were folded in the same cross-legged position. Each clutched a data pad against their chest. Their large eyes, still oversized for their developing skulls, were fixed on the human with absolute fascination. As Draxel watched, the human sighed frustration at something in her book. 3 small sighs echoed hers perfectly. By all the stars in the void, Draxel breathed. Doctor then arrived at a run, her neural scanning equipment already active. Commander, what are we? Oh no. Oh no, no, no. Her face went pale beneath her facial plates as her scanners processed the readings. Their neuroplasticity has increased 400%. Their cognitive flexibility is off every chart I have. This shouldn't be possible. Can you separate them? Draxel demanded. I can try, but Commander, look at their synchronization. They're not just near the human, they're patterning with her. Their brain wave cycles are starting to match her study rhythms. Inside the sanctuary, Yuki turned a page. 3 cubs mimed the gesture with their data pads, creating a soft rustling sound. I'm going in then, announced, adjusting her equipment. Prepare emergency neural reset protocols. If I can disrupt the pattern before it solidifies. Wait, Vexthar pointed at his scanner. Sir, the human just noticed us. Yuki had indeed looked up from her textbook, her eyes widening as she took in the crowd of aliens pressed against the sanctuary barrier, the flashing emergency lights and the very obvious panic on every face. Her mouth formed a small O of surprise. Is everything okay? She called out, her voice carrying through the barrier's audio system. Did I miss an alarm or something? The cub's head swiveled in perfect unison to look at the barrier, then back to Yuki, then back to the barrier. One of them, the smallest, made a questioning trill. Entering now, F then said, keying the barrier controls. She stepped through with her neural scanner active, trying to project calm authority despite her racing hearts. Human, you must cease all cognitive activity immediately. Yuki blinked up at her, highlighter frozen halfway to the page. I'm just reading about organic chemistry. She held up the textbook as if that explained everything. Is this not allowed? The door was open and it was quiet. So I thought you thought wrong. Then's composure cracked. This is a restricted developmental sanctuary. These cubs are in their critical formation period. Your human thought patterns could cause irreparable. She stopped, staring at her scanner in disbelief. The cubs had started drawing on their data pads, not random scribbles, chemical structures, rough, childish approximations of the molecular diagrams from Yuki's textbook. That's impossible. Then whispered, there. Praetorate, they shouldn't be able to reproduce symbolic representations. They shouldn't even understand that symbols can represent molecular structures. Yuki leaned over to look at the nearest cub's work. Oh, that's really good. You've almost got the benzene ring right here. The carbons go like this. She gestured. In the air, tracing the hexagonal shape. 3 small hands traced the hexagon. Perfect synchronization. Stopped, then lunged forward with her. Neural disruptor, trying to break the cognitive link. The device hummed too. Life projecting a telepathic static. Field designed to interrupt synchronized thought patterns. The cubs didn't even flinch. They were too focused on Yuki's hand movements, trying to memorize the pattern. The disruptor isn't working. Then reported, her voice climbing in octave. Commander, the cubs have developed cognitive shielding. They're blocking my telepathic intervention, just like humans naturally shield. Draxel watched through the barrier as his worst nightmare unfolded in real time. The cubs weren't just mimicking the human anymore, they were learning from her, learning how to learn like her. Trisonic distraction, he ordered. Level 3 harmonic pulse. It should startle them enough to break focus. Sanctuary speakers emitted a carefully calibrated sound designed to capture juvenile Quillarian attention, a frequency that mimicked parental calling patterns. Every cub in the sector should have immediately responded, looking for the source. These 3 cubs didn't even twitch. Yuki winced and put her hands over her ears, but the cubs remained locked on their data pads, still trying to perfect their molecular drawings. They're ignoring species-specific stimulus, Vexthar reported. Unnecessarily. Everyone could see it. The barrier opened again. A Quillian adult female rushed through, her crest fully extended. In alarm, where are my babies? What have you done to my offspring? She stopped dead, her telepathic sense overwhelming her visual input. Draxel knew what she was experiencing. Her cubs' minds felt different, not damaged, not fragmented, but changed, organized, in ways that Quillarian minds didn't organize naturally. They're right. There, ma'am, Draxel said gently. They're unharmed, but unharmed. The mother's voice shook. Their thoughts are rigid structured, their thinking in linear patterns. She whirled on Yuki. What did you do to them? Yuki scrambled to her feet, her textbook falling closed. I didn't do anything. I swear I just sat down to study and they came over and they were so cute, so I smiled at them and then they sat down too. And I thought maybe they were curious. So I whispered that I was studying for midterms, and she was babbling now, clearly overwhelmed, the cubs sensing her distress made small, worried sounds. The smallest one, barely 3 standard cycles old, got up and waddled over to Yuki. The child grabbed Yuki's hand with both of her tiny ones and patted it comfortingly. Oh no, sweetie, I'm okay, Yuki said, automatically, her voice softening. Don't worry about the grown-ups. We're just talking. The cub looked up at her with enormous trusting eyes and made a questioning trill, the same frustrated sound Yuki had made earlier when encountering a difficult passage in her textbook. Every adult in the room froze. Did she just, the mother whispered, did my daughter just vocalize a human expression of cognitive frustration? She did, then confirmed, her scanner nearly vibrating with activity. And look, the other 2 are organizing the sanctuary toys by color and size. That's human categorical organization. Quillians don't naturally organize objects that way. We organize by telepathic resonance. Indeed, the middle and eldest cubs had abandoned their data pads and were busy arranging scattered educational objects into neat rows. 1 pile of blue items, 1 pile of red, 1 pile of green. each pile further. Subdivided by size, Yuki took a sip of her coffee, trying to calm her nerves. All 3 cubs immediately mimed, drinking from empty hands, tipping invisible cups to their mouths. This is a nightmare, Draxel said quietly. We need to call in Dr. Fenris. Fenris. Vexthar's voice squeaked. The council's top developmental psychologist, sir. He's 3 sectors away. Then we better authorize emergency transport because we're witnessing something that shouldn't be scientifically possible, and I need someone who can explain it before the Quillian government decides this constitutes an act of war. Dr. Fenris materialized in the station's emergency transport bay 14 minutes later. His feathers ruffled from rapid transit. Avian psychologist clutched his diagnostic equipment and moved with a precise urgency of someone who'd been briefed mid-transport about an unprecedented crisis. Where are they? He demanded, bypassing all protocol. Draxel led him to the sanctuary at a near run. 3 cubs, 1 human. Cognitive patterns we can't explain. Fenris swept into the sanctuary, his scanning equipment already active before he'd fully crossed the threshold. His crest feathers flared as the readings hit him. Extraordinary. Their neuroplasticity isn't just elevated, it's restructured. They're developing dual processing capabilities. Can you fix it? The mother asked desperately. Fix? Fenris circled the cubs, who were now attempting to highlight passages on their data pads with their fingers, mimicking Yuki's yellow marker. Movements, madam, I'm not certain there's anything to fix. This is unprecedented, yes, but look at their engagement levels, look at their focus. Duration, he gestured at the middle cub, who had been concentrating on the same molecular drawing for nearly 10 minutes. An impossible attention span for someone his age. Quillian cubs this age typically maintain focus for 45 seconds before requiring telepathic guidance from adults. This one has been self-directing his attention for 600 seconds and counting. That's because the human infected him. The mother's crest flattened in distress, or Fenris said carefully, she's teaching him something. We can't. I'm really sorry, Yuki interjected quietly from her corner. She'd returned to sitting, though she looked miserable rather than focused. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Should I go? I can go. I'll just. She started gathering her things. The smallest cub immediately burst into tears. Not the telepathic distress calls that Quilarian. Young typically broadcast actual tears streaming down her face, accompanied by hiccuping sobs that sounded remarkably like human crying. She's weeping, then said, stunned. Quilarians don't produce tears for emotional expression until adolescence. It's a learned social behavior that takes years to develop. The other 2 cubs rushed to their sister, patting her back in obvious comfort. Another human gesture they'd absorbed in less than 4 hours. Yuki looked stricken. Oh no. Please don't cry. I'm not leaving, okay? See, she set her textbook down and held out her arms. I'm staying right here. The smallest cub ran to her, and Yuki caught her automatically, settling the child on her lap. The cub buried her face in Yuki's shirt, still hiccuping. Sadly, this is Fenris's voice trailed off as he watched his scanner readings. Commander, I need to run the full developmental diagnostic. This will take approximately 30 minutes, whatever you need, Draxel said. Fenris deployed his equipment around the sanctuary, creating a network of sensors that monitored everything from brain activity to pheromone production. He worked in silence while Yuki sat frozen, afraid to move with a Qualarian cub in her lap. The other two cubs had returned to their molecular drawings occasionally, glancing at Yuki to make sure she was still there. Finally, Fenris straightened, reviewing his compiled data. His expression was unreadable. Well, the mother demanded, in 40 years of practice across 200 species, Fenris said slowly, I have never encountered juveniles who adopted foreign learning methodologies this rapidly or this completely. He paused. I need to attempt the standard cognitive reset protocols. If the human patterns have truly imprinted, the cubs will resist. If they're merely confused, they'll respond normally to Qualarian teaching methods. He activated his telepathic interface, projecting the warm, guiding presence that had helped thousands of young minds find their way back to species normal development. The cubs looked at him politely, then returned their attention to their drawings. They're rejecting the telepathic guidance, Fenris said, his voice barely above a whisper, completely and totally rejecting it. They're not confused or disoriented. They're actively choosing the human methodology over our species' natural learning process. The mother made a sound of pure anguish. Try again, please try again. Fenris intensified the telepathic projection, flooding the sanctuary with soothing parental frequencies designed to draw cubs back into collective learning mode. It was the psychological equivalent of a mother's embrace. No Qualarian child had ever resisted it in recorded history. The eldest cub looked up briefly, made an annoyed clicking sound, and went back to his work. He just dismissed me, Fenris said in disbelief. A 6-cycle-old cub just consciously rejected standard pedagogical intervention. Maybe they're just really focused, Yuki offered weakly, still holding the smallest cub, who had finally stopped crying but refused to leave her lap. When I'm studying for a big exam, I kind of tune everything out too. You tune everything out, Fenris repeated slowly, turning to face her fully for the first time. You block external input to maintain internal focus. I mean, yeah. Doesn't everyone? No, Fenris said flatly. Most species don't. Most species are designed for collective learning, shared knowledge transfer, or environmental absorption. Humans developed in isolation on a single world, with no telepathic abilities whatsoever. You had to create artificial systems to transmit information across individuals. You mean like books in schools? Yuki held up her textbook. Exactly like books. In schools, individual study, personal note-taking, self-directed learning. Fenris's crest feathers stood fully upright, and these cubs have now acquired those capabilities in a single afternoon. The middle cub suddenly made a frustrated sound and held up his data pad to Yuki. Help, he said clearly in perfectly pronounced standard language. He shouldn't have any context. For Yuki's eyes widened. Did he just speak? Quillian cubs communicate telepathically until age 10, then said faintly, verbal language is considered crude and unnecessary during development. Help, the cub repeated insistently, shaking his data pad. Yuki looked at the adults helplessly. Can I? You might as well, Draxel said, sounding defeated. We're well past the point of preventing contamination. Yuki shifted the smallest cub to her side and looked at the middle Cubs work, okay, so you're trying to draw the carboxylic acid group, right? The problem is you've got too many bonds on this carbon. Carbon can only make 4 bonds, see, so if it's already connected. To the Cub's face lit up with understanding, he erased part of his drawing and corrected it. Perfect, Yuki said encouragingly. That's exactly right. The Cub beamed and ran to show his mother, who stared at the molecular structure with horror and confusion. I don't understand what I'm looking at. It's a chemical drawing, Yuki explained, a way of representing how atoms connect to each other. It's pretty basic organic chemistry, first semester stuff he learned first semester university level symbolic representation in 4 hours, Fenris said, his scanner nearly smoking from processing power without telepathic knowledge transfer through observation and independent problem solving. The eldest Cub had been quietly watching this exchange. Now she got up, walked over to the scattered toys sheet, organized and deliberately mixed them all up again. Then she sat down and began reorganizing them, this time by shape instead of color. What is she doing? The mother asked, testing variables, Yuki said automatically, seeing if the organizing principle works with different categories. That's actually really smart experimental design. She's 3 cycles old, mother wailed. Fenris dropped his scanner entirely. Commander, we need an emergency session with the Qualarian High Council immediately. The emergency council session convened via holographic transmission within the hour. 7 members of the Quillian High Council materialized in the station's conference chamber, their projections flickering with the urgency of the connection. Draxil had never seen a full council assembly mobilize this quickly, not even during the Sector 7 plague outbreak. High Councilor Navarra, eldest of the council members, spoke first. Her aged crest feathers trembled with barely contained alarm. Commander Draxil, we have reviewed the preliminary reports. They are difficult to accept. You are telling us that 3 of our Cubs have been cognitively compromised by a human. Not compromised, Counselor Fenris interjected before Draxil could respond. Augmented. The word hung in the air like a detonation. Augmented. Navarra's voice dropped dangerously low. Explain carefully. Fenris pulled up his diagnostic data, projecting neural scans across the chamber. The Cubs haven't lost any Qualarian capabilities. Their telepathic sensitivity remains intact. Their natural cognitive patterns are undamaged, but they've gained something additional: the human capacity for independent, self-directed learning. That's a contradiction. Another Counselor Torvak stated flatly. Our species evolved to learn collectively. Individual learning is antithetical to our neural architecture. I would have agreed with you this morning, Fenris said, but the evidence is irrefutable. These Cubs now possess dual mode learning capabilities. They can receive telepathic knowledge transfer and pursue independent study. They have twice the learning pathways of any Quilarian. Our recorded history. The mother, who had been brought to the conference chamber, spoke up tremblingly. But at what cost? What have they lost? That's what I spent the last hour testing, Fenris said gently. He pulled up a new scan. I conducted full developmental assessments on all 3 Cubs. Their social bonding capabilities unchanged. Their telepathic reign actually slightly increased. Their emotional regulation more sophisticated. Than baseline, their creative problem solving exponentially enhanced. Enhanced, Navarro repeated skeptically. You're certain this isn't temporary? Some sort of mimicry phase, I tested. That specifically, Fenris pulled up. Footage from the sanctuary, watch this. Interaction. The hologram showed the eldest cub organizing toys, but this time the view included thermal imaging and neural activity overlays. As the cub worked, her brain showed activity in regions that typically remain dormant. In juveniles, executive function areas, abstract reasoning centers, pattern recognition nodes. She's not copying the human, Fenris explained. She's independently applying principles she observed. That's a crucial distinction. Mimicry would show activity only. Memory and motor control areas. This is active creative application of learned concepts. Counselor Torvex leaned forward, and the verbal language acquisition. Cubs don't develop verbal centers until adolescence. Another example of accelerated development without loss of baseline function. The language centers activated early, but the telepathic centers remain fully functional. She can do both. Yuki had been standing awkwardly at the edge of the conference chamber, trying to be invisible. Now Navarra's gaze fixed on her. Human, you are the cause of this phenomenon. What is your assessment? What? Yuki's voice cracked. I'm a biology student. I don't know anything about alien child development. I was just trying to study for my biochemistry midterm, yet you somehow imprinted human learning patterns onto 3 quillion cubs in less than 5 hours. I didn't mean to. They seemed interested, and they were really sweet, and I thought maybe they were bored, so I let them hang out while I studied. Yuki's hands twisted together anxiously. Look where I come from. Kids copy adults all the time. It's normal. They see you doing something, they want to try it too. I didn't know it was dangerous for them. It wasn't dangerous, Fenris said firmly. That's what I'm trying to explain. The human didn't damage these cubs. She showed them an alternative way of learning that their species never evolved because you never needed it. We don't need it now, Torv said sharply. Don't we? Fenris challenged. Counselor, our species has relied on telepathic knowledge transfer for millennia. It's efficient, elegant, and communal, but it has one critical weakness. It requires a knowledge bearer to transmit information. If no one in the collective knows something, it cannot be learned. That's why we have the archives, the historical consciousness, the all of which are records of things already known. Fenris interrupted. But how do we learn genuinely new things? How do we discover what no Quillian has ever known before? The council fell silent. We observe, Navarra said slowly. We experiment. Our scientists develop new knowledge that then enters the collective consciousness. And how long does that take? Generations, because our cubs are trained from birth to receive knowledge, not to seek it independently. We've optimized for information transfer at the expense of information discovery. Fenris gestured at the cubs in the sanctuary feed. These 3 cubs in 5 hours learned to pursue knowledge independently. They learned to be frustrated by not knowing and to persist. Through that frustration, they learned that answers can be found through individual effort, not just collective sharing. You're suggesting this is beneficial, Navarra said carefully. I'm suggesting it might be revolutionary. The mother made a distressed sound, but They're so young, they're supposed to be guided, protected, kept safe in the collective consciousness. Now they're out there thinking alone, working through problems by themselves. What if they fail? What if they get something wrong? Yuki spoke up quietly. Then they learned from the mistake. Every head turned toward her. That's how humans learn, Yuki continued, her voice gaining confidence. We mess up constantly. I probably get half the practice problems in this textbook wrong the first time. She held up her heavily annotated book. See all these eraser marks? Those are mistakes, but each mistake teaches me something about what doesn't work, and eventually I figure out what does work. That sounds terribly inefficient, Torvax observed. Maybe, Yuki admitted, but it also means we learn things no one can teach us. We discover answers that don't exist yet, and yeah, we fail a lot along the way. But she shrugged helplessly. That's just part of being human, I guess. The smallest cub had toddled into the conference chamber, having escaped the sanctuary when no one was watching. She walked directly to Yuki and raised her arms in the universal gesture of a child wanting to be picked up. Yuki looked at the council helplessly. May I? Invara nodded, her expression unreadable. Yuki lifted the cub, who immediately settled against her shoulder with a contented sigh. The child's small hand clutched Yuki's shirt and her eyes began to droop. Apparently all the excitement had exhausted her. She trusts you, the mother said softly, watching her daughter completely and instinctively. Cubs don't trust outside the collective consciousness. It takes years to develop independent relationships with non-family members. Yet your daughter formed this bond in hours, Fenris observed. Another accelerated development, another capability gained. Navarra was quiet for a long moment, studying the image of a human student holding a Quillarian cub, like it was the most natural thing in the universe. Finally she spoke. Dr. Fenris, I want continuous monitoring of these 3 cubs, full developmental tracking for the next 5 cycles. I want to know every change, every advancement, every potential complication. Of course, counselor. And human, Yuki, is it? Yes, ma'am. I mean, yes, counselor. You will continue to interact with these cubs under supervised conditions. I want to observe this phenomenon over time. Yuki's eyes widened. You want me to keep studying with them? I want you to continue whatever it was you were doing that produced this effect. Consider it part of your cultural exchange program. Obligations. 3 weeks later, the diplomatic station's library had been transformed into something unprecedented in Quillian space, a study hall. Yuki sat at her usual corner table, textbooks and notebooks spread around her in organized chaos. The 3 cubs had their own smaller table adjacent to hers, complete with child-sized chairs that station engineers had fabricated specifically for this purpose. The smallest cub, who had started responding to the name Pip that Yuki had accidentally given her, was carefully copying letters from a basic language primer, her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, a gesture she'd picked up from watching Yuki during particularly difficult study sessions. The middle cub, whom everyone now called Dash after his tendency to rush through problems, was working through simple mathematics using physical counting objects. He'd dump them out, count them, write down the number, then scramble them and count again, testing whether the quantity changed based on arrangement. The eldest Nova had moved beyond imitation. Entirely, she requested access to the station's botanical database and was cross-referencing plant species, making notes about patterns she observed in their classification systems. Nova's showing taxonomic reasoning. Fenris reported to Draxel, watching through the observation window, that's doctoral-level cognitive work. She's 6. Is it sustainable? Draxel asked. The council wants to know if this is causing any developmental damage. The opposite, all 3 cubs are hitting standard Quillian developmental milestones while simultaneously achieving human-style independent learning milestones. They're not replacing their natural abilities. They're supplementing them in the study hall. Yuki finished a problem set and stretched. Okay guys, I need a break. Anybody want snacks? 3 hands shot up. Immediately, Yuki laughed and pulled out the supplies she now brought daily. Fruit slices, crackers, juice pouches. The cubs had developed strong opinions about human food. Pip loved anything sweet, Dash preferred crunchy textures. Nova was adventurous and tried everything at least once. The mother entered quietly, as she did every afternoon, to observe her children. She'd been skeptical at first, terrified even, but watching Pip successfully complete a simple addition problem by herself without any telepathic guidance had cracked something open in her understanding. She's so proud, the mother whispered to Fenris. Did you see her face when she got the answer right? Individual achievement satisfaction. Fenris confirmed, a completely human emotional response that she's integrated into her Quillarian emotional framework. Is that okay? More than okay. It's extraordinary.